The bustling spaceport of Valterra was alive with the hum of activity, its towering glass and metal spires disappearing into the hazy, polluted sky. Swarms of sleek air vehicles zipped between them like choreographed insects, while holographic billboards promoted everything from the latest AI assistants to high-end cruises to the crystalline moons of Zavros 4. Among the chaos, a rugged human named Lucas Thorne navigated the crowd, his confident stride and piercing green eyes cutting through the throng. His tousled black hair, square jaw covered in light stubble, and the blaster strapped to his thigh all hinted at years spent as a skilled, hardened mercenary. Lucas wasn't here by chance. His mission? Retrieve a priceless stolen artifact for a wealthy client. His journey had taken him deep into Valterra's underworld, a maze of shadowy alleys and lawless markets where the city's criminal element thrived. As he moved through the dim streets, his sharp gaze scanned his surroundings for any sign of a threat. Then, from the corner of his eye, a flash of violet caught his attention. He turned, spotting a woman peering cautiously around a corner. Her skin was a soft, pale lavender, her large, striking turquoise eyes filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She wore a flowing white robe, instantly recognizable as the attire of a nun from the Order of the Sacred Stars, an ancient sect known for its isolation from the outside world. Lucas felt his pulse quicken. What was a member of such a secluded order doing in this part of the city? And why did she look so out of place, so vulnerable? He approached her cautiously, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Miss, are you okay? This isn't exactly the safest area," he said gently. Startled, the nun flinched, her wide eyes locking onto his. She hesitated before speaking, her voice soft but melodic. I'm fine. Just needed some fresh air," she murmured, though her tone betrayed her unease. Lucas raised an eyebrow skeptically. "In this neighborhood? It seems more like you might be lost," he said with a hint of concern. She blushed, stepping out fully from her hiding spot. It was then Lucas noticed the tear in the side of her robe, exposing a small, smooth patch of her violet skin. Her eyes widened as she realized it too, quickly attempting to cover the rip with her hands. Without hesitation, Lucas shrugged off his leather jacket and offered it to her, looking away respectfully. "Here, take this. You'll catch a chill if you don't," he insisted. The nun, her name, he learned, was Yara, hesitated before accepting the jacket, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled it over her torn robe. As she wrapped it around herself, her delicate features softened in gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, the warmth of the human's jacket already calming her frayed nerves. "I'm Lucas, by the way," he said, flashing a roguish grin. "Now, how about I help you get back to your monasteries?" Yara bit her lip, glancing around nervously before shaking her head. I can't go back. Not yet. There's something I need to figure out first." Her voice was barely above a whisper, her fear palpable. Lucas's interest deepened. His mercenary instincts told him there was more to Yara's story than met the eye. "What's going on? Are you in trouble?" he asked, his voice dropping into a more serious tone. Yara looked into his eyes, searching for something. Trust, perhaps. "It's complicated," she finally confessed, her voice shaking. "But I need help, and I think you might be the only one who can provide it." Lucas nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "There's a tea shop nearby. Quiet safe. Let's talk there," he suggested, offering his arm. After a moment's hesitation, Yara looped her slender arm through his, sending an unexpected warmth through both of them. The tea shop, tucked between a bustling pawn shop and a food stand, was an unassuming refuge in the heart of the chaos. The sign above the door read, "Madame Iris's Teas and Treasures." As they stepped inside, a small bell tinkled, announcing their arrival. Madame Iris, a petite, elderly woman with silver hair and a mischievous twinkle in her eye, greeted them warmly. "Lucas, and who's this lovely young lady?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "This is Yara," Lucas replied, flashing a smile. "We're here for some peace and quiet, and maybe a pot of your famous Chardonnay tea." Madame Iris nodded knowingly, her sharp eyes flicking between them before disappearing behind the counter to prepare their order. As Lucas and Yara settled into a secluded corner, Lucas leaned forward, his eyes softening as he focused on her. "Now, tell me what's really going on," he urged gently. Yara's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her cup of tea. "I've been at the monastery since I was a child," she began. "But recently things have changed. Strange shipments arriving in the middle of the night. New faces, people who don't seem to belong. And then I overheard something that made me question everything." Lucas listened intently, a sinking feeling growing in his gut. He had a hunch that whatever Yara had discovered was tied to the artifact he was after. "I heard the abbess speaking to someone, a man. He was demanding payment, saying they couldn't hold on to the goods any longer," Yara whispered, her voice shaking. "The abbess promised they'd sell it soon. Something valuable." Lucas's eyes darkened. There was no doubt about it now. The monastery was involved in something far more sinister than Yara could have imagined, and it was clear she was in danger. Before Lucas could ask another question, the door to the shop burst open with a crash. 3 heavily armed thugs stormed in, led by a scarred, menacing man. He sneered as he spotted Yara. "Well, well," he growled. "Looks like we found our runaway nun." Lucas was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between Yara and the thugs. "The lady isn't going anywhere with you," he said coolly, cracking his knuckles. The leader of the group chuckled darkly. "3 of us, 1 of you? Hand her over, and maybe we'll let you walk out of here." Lucas smirked, unfazed. "How about we settle this the old-fashioned way? No blasters, just fists?" The thug leader grinned, tossing his weapon aside. "Fine by me." What followed was a brutal, fast-paced brawl. Lucas, with the grace of a seasoned fighter, expertly took on all 3 thugs. In minutes, they were sprawled on the floor, groaning in defeat. Lucas stood victorious, his knuckles bruised but his spirit unbroken. Yara rushed to his side, her eyes wide with concern. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Never better," Lucas replied with a grin, though his eyes softened as they met hers. As Madame Irith peeked out from behind the counter, Lucas knew their time here was up. He turned to Yara, his tone serious. "We need to get you somewhere safe." Yara nodded, her trust in him now absolute. Together, they slipped out the back of the shop, leaving the wreckage behind as they prepared for whatever dangers lay ahead, knowing that, no matter what, they would face them together. The narrow streets of Valtara's underbelly were shrouded in darkness, the neon lights above casting an eerie glow as Lucas led Yara through the winding alleyways. The scent of burnt fuel and damp metal filled the air, but Lucas barely noticed. His mind raced as he plotted their next move. Yara walked close to him, her violet skin almost luminous in the dim light, clutching his jacket tightly around her. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Lucas glanced down at her, sensing the tension in her slender frame. "A safe house I keep for situations like this. It's hidden, and the people after you won't find us there," he assured her, though a part of him wondered if anywhere was truly safe while the abbess's men were on their tail. They turned another corner, and Lucas slowed as they reached a heavy, unmarked door nestled between 2 crumbling buildings. He keyed in a code on a small pad hidden beneath a loose brick, and the door slid open with a low hiss. Inside, the room was small and utilitarian. A single table, a few chairs, a cot, and a wall lined with old weapon crates. The space was dimly lit by a flickering light on the ceiling, casting deep shadows across the bare concrete floor. Lucas motioned for Yara to enter first, then closed the door behind them. "It's not much, but it'll do for now," he said, crossing to the window and pulling the curtains tight. Yara sank into one of the chairs, her fingers still gripping the edges of his jacket. She looked up at Lucas with those mesmerizing turquoise eyes, her fear tempered by a growing resolve. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me back there." Lucas shrugged, sitting down across from her. "Let's just say I've got a thing for getting into trouble." He flashed a half-smile, but it quickly faded. "Now, we need to talk. What exactly did you hear back at the monastery? I need to know everything." Yara took a deep breath, steadying herself before she began. "The monastery, it's not what it seems. I thought it was a place of peace, a sanctuary where we serve the sacred stars. But recently, things started to change. Strange people began visiting, men who don't belong in a place like that. I overheard some of the sisters talking in whispers about deliveries and buyers. She shuddered. I didn't want to believe it, but then I overheard the abbess herself. She was talking about selling something important. A man was demanding payment, and she was desperate to keep things quiet. Lucas listened carefully, his mind piecing together the puzzle. He had been hired to recover a stolen artifact, something of immense value, and now it was clear the monastery was involved. But why? What would drive a sacred order to dabble in smuggling and theft? What about the artifact? Lucas pressed. Do you know what it is, or where they're keeping it? Yara shook her head, her expression clouded with worry. I don't know exactly. I've heard rumors, though. Some of the sisters mentioned an ancient relic, something with great power. They said it was hidden in the lower sanctum, a place only the abbess has access to. Lucas's jaw tightened. An ancient relic with great power. That was never good. He'd seen enough of the galaxy to know that anything with that description usually ended in destruction and chaos. Whatever the abbess was planning, it needed to be stopped. He stood, pacing the small room. We need to get into that sanctum and see what we're dealing with. If the abbess is willing to sell this relic, it's bound to attract some dangerous buyers. And I've got a feeling your life is tied up in this more than you realize. Yara's eyes widened. You think I'm in danger because of the relic? Lucas nodded. The fact that they're after you means you've seen too much. They can't afford to let you go back to the monastery or talk to anyone else. The abbess will stop at nothing to keep her secrets. Yara looked down, her hands trembling slightly. I thought I was safe at the monastery. I thought it was home. She trailed off, her voice barely a whisper. Lucas moved toward her, crouching down to meet her eyes. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out. But you need to trust me. We'll go to the monastery tonight, find that relic, and figure out what's really going on. Once we have it, we can use it as leverage to stop the abbess. Yara met his gaze, the determination returning to her features. I trust you, Lucas. But if we're going back to the monastery, it won't be easy. The guards, the sisters, they'll all be watching. Lucas smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. Good thing I've got a knack for getting into places I'm not supposed to. Underscore. The monastery loomed in the distance, its towering spires rising against the night sky like sentinels. Lucas and Yara crouched in the shadows of a nearby ridge, watching as patrols of guards moved through the grounds. The air was cool and still, but Lucas could feel the tension between them. This mission was dangerous, but there was no other choice. Are you sure about this? Yara whispered, her eyes scanning the grounds nervously. Lucas nodded, pulling a pair of night vision goggles from his pack and handing them to her. We'll go in through the maintenance tunnels. They're not well guarded, and they'll lead us directly into the lower sanctum. Yara slipped on the goggles, her face set with determination. I'm ready. They moved quickly and silently, sticking to the shadows as they approached the hidden entrance to the tunnels. Lucas hacked the lock, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. The tunnel was dark and narrow, the sound of dripping water echoing off the stone walls. Yara followed closely behind Lucas, her heart pounding in her chest. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a heavy metal door at the end of the tunnel. Lucas paused, pressing his ear to the door before carefully opening it. Beyond, the lower sanctum stretched out before them, dimly lit by ancient torches that flickered in the cool air. The room was vast, lined with towering statues of long-forgotten deities and shelves filled with dusty tomes. In the center of the room, resting on a stone pedestal, was the relic. Yara gasped softly. It was a small, unassuming object, a black, polished stone with intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. But even from across the room, Lucas could feel the power emanating from it. This is it, Yara whispered, her voice trembling. This is what they've been hiding. Lucas stepped forward, eyes narrowing as he studied the relic. Whatever it is, it's not just some trinket. This thing could be dangerous. Before they could move closer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the sanctum. Lucas and Yara froze, their hearts racing as a figure emerged from the shadows. None other than the abbess herself. "I knew you couldn't stay away," the abbess said, her voice cold and calculating as she stepped toward them. "You've seen too much, Yara, and now you'll pay the price." Lucas instinctively moved in front of Yara, his hand reaching for his blaster. "Not today, abbess." The abbess's eyes gleamed with malice as she smiled darkly. "Oh, Lucas, you're out of your depth. You don't know what you're dealing with." Before Lucas could react, the abbess raised her hand, and the relic began to glow with an ominous, pulsing light. The air in the sanctum crackled with energy, and Lucas realized with a sinking feeling that they were in far more danger than he had anticipated. The air hummed with a menacing energy as the relic pulsed with an eerie glow, casting long shadows across the stone floor of the sanctum. The abbess stood at its center, her eyes alight with a cold, calculating fury. Lucas felt the weight of the danger sink in. The relic wasn't just powerful, it was alive, and the abbess seemed to wield it with terrifying ease. Yara clutched Lucas's arm tightly, her fear palpable. "Lucas, that relic, it's not just an artifact. It's something more, something evil." Lucas nodded slightly, his mind racing as he calculated their next move. His hand hovered near his blaster, but he knew from the intensity of the relic's power that a direct confrontation could be fatal. Still, he wasn't about to let Yara fall into the abbess's hands. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Yara, his voice low but steady. The abbess's lips curled into a sinister smile as she stepped closer, her hands raised, controlling the energy that now crackled around the relic. "You foolish girl," she hissed at Yara, her voice dripping with venom. "Did you really think you could run from me? From the truth? You've been a part of this plan since the day you arrived at the monastery. You, Yara, are the key." Yara's eyes widened in shock. "The key? What are you talking about?" The abbess's smile deepened. "The relic requires a sacrifice, a being pure of heart, untouched by the corrupting forces of the galaxy. You, my dear, are that being. You were chosen for this long before you knew it." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the cold dread seep into him, but he couldn't afford to show it. "Chosen? You're using her as some kind of pawn in your sick game?" The abbess's gaze flickered toward Lucas, her disdain clear. "You wouldn't understand, mercenary. This isn't just about money or power. This is about the future of the galaxy. The relic contains an ancient force, one that could either destroy or save us all. But it requires a catalyst to awaken its full potential, and Yara is that catalyst." Yara took a step back, her breath coming in short gasps. No, this can't be true. I was just a child when I came to the monastery. You can't have known." "Oh, but we did," the abbess interrupted, her voice cruelly calm. "You were chosen precisely because of your innocence, your purity. The sacred moons watched over you, guiding you to us. And now, it's time for you to fulfill your destiny." Lucas felt the tension building, and he knew time was running out. He had to act and fast. The abbess was too focused on Yara, too certain of her control. That was the opening Lucas needed. Without warning, Lucas dove for his blaster, drawing it in a fluid motion and firing a shot at the relic. The energy field around it flared violently as the shot hit, sending sparks flying across the sanctum. The abbess shrieked, momentarily losing her hold on the relic's power. "Run!" Lucas shouted, grabbing Yara's hand and pulling her toward the far side of the room. They sprinted across the sanctum, weaving between the ancient statues and shelves as the abbess recovered, her fury palpable. "You think you can escape? You think you can defy me?" Her voice echoed with a dark, unnatural force, and the relic pulsed again, this time sending a shockwave that rippled through the room. Lucas and Yara barely managed to dive behind a massive stone pillar as the wave of energy tore through the space, cracking the stone floor and toppling shelves in its wake. Dust and debris filled the air, but Lucas kept a firm grip on Yara, his mind locked on their survival. "We can't keep running," Yara gasped, her face pale. "The relic, it's too strong." Lucas peered around the pillar, catching a glimpse of the abbess as she stalked toward them, her hands raised once more, ready to unleash the full force of the relic's power. He knew Yara was right. They needed a new plan fast. Do you know anything about stopping it? Lucas asked urgently, his voice tense. Anything at all? Yara closed her eyes, trying to remember the ancient texts she had studied at the monastery. There had been whispers of the relic's dark history, stories of its origin. The relic's power comes from its connection to the sacred moons, she said, her voice trembling with fear and resolve. It was said that only someone with a direct bond to the moons could control it, or destroy it. Lucas's eyes widened as realization struck. You have the bond, don't you? Yara hesitated, then nodded. But I don't know how to use it. The abbess has spent years manipulating the relic. I've never even... You don't have to know how, Lucas interrupted, his voice firm. You just have to try. If the abbess thinks you're the key, then you have the power to stop this. Yara stared at him, uncertainty and fear warring in her eyes. What if I fail? Lucas grasped her shoulders, his gaze intense. You won't. You've already survived this long. You're stronger than you think. Behind them, the abbess was drawing closer, the energy around the relic intensifying. The time for hesitation was over. Yara took a deep breath, her eyes flicking to the relic. Okay, she whispered, steeling herself. I'll try. Lucas gave her a sharp nod and released her, pulling his blaster once more. I'll cover you. Do whatever you need to do. As Yara stood and began to move toward the relic, Lucas fired another round at the abbess, forcing her to halt and shield herself with a burst of energy. It was enough to buy Yara the time she needed. She approached the relic cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest as she reached out toward the pulsing stone. The moment her fingers brushed the surface of the relic, a jolt of energy surged through her, powerful and overwhelming. Yara gasped, her mind flooded with visions, stars, moons, ancient civilizations long forgotten. The relic's history unfolded before her in a blur, and she could feel its power coursing through her veins. The abbess screamed in rage as she realized what was happening. No, you don't understand what you're doing. If you take control of the relic, you'll doom us all. But Yara didn't stop. She focused on the energy flowing from the relic, drawing it into herself. The relic's pulse quickened, growing brighter and more unstable with every passing second. Lucas, watching from his cover, felt the shift in the air. The power in the room was becoming dangerous, unpredictable. He could see Yara struggling to contain it, her body trembling under the strain. Yara, Lucas shouted. You have to end it, now. Yara closed her eyes, focusing all her will on one final command, to destroy the relic. The energy inside her flared, building to a crescendo as the relic glowed brighter and brighter. And then, with a deafening crack, the stone shattered. The explosion of light and power rocked the sanctum, knocking both Lucas and the abbess to the ground. Yara collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath as the relic's energy dissipated into the air. The abbess, weakened and disoriented, struggled to stand, her power gone. Lucas staggered to his feet, rushing to Yara's side. You did it, he breathed, pulling her into his arms. Yara looked up at him, her face pale but relieved. It's over. But even as they stood there, victorious, Lucas knew the fight wasn't finished. The abbess might be powerless, but she wasn't defeated. And there were others out there, buyers, smugglers, forces far worse than the abbess, who would stop at nothing to claim what was left of the relic's power. We have to leave, Lucas said, helping Yara to her feet. This isn't over yet. And as they fled the sanctum, the abbess's voice echoed after them, filled with bitter rage and the promise of vengeance. The skies over Noveria had darkened, a storm brewing in the distance. Thunder rolled through the smog-choked city as Lucas and Yara hurried through the winding streets, hearts pounding. The relic was destroyed, but they knew the abbess wasn't far behind. The relic's remnants were still valuable, and the monastery's shadowy buyers would not easily let go of their prize. We can't keep running forever, Yara gasped, her breath coming in short bursts as they ducked into an alley. She'll find us? Lucas paused, glancing around the narrow street, its stone walls cracked and worn from years of neglect. His mind raced with possibilities. "We don't have to run forever," he said, his voice low but determined. "But we need to make sure this ends tonight." Yara's wide eyes met his. "How?" Lucas pulled a small device from his jacket, a communicator linked to a network of mercenaries and outlaws. He keyed in a code, sending a signal to an old contact. "I've got a ship hidden near the spaceport. It's fast, and it'll get us out of here. But before we leave, we have one last thing to do." Yara's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "The abbess will keep coming after you, and after anyone else who stands in her way," Lucas explained, his blue eyes dark with resolve. "She won't stop until she's dead, or we are. We have to face her, Yara. This ends here." Yara swallowed hard, fear flickering in her chest. She had seen the raw power the abbess wielded, the way she had used the relic to bend the universe to her will. But Lucas was right. They couldn't keep running. If they didn't stop the abbess now, she would never stop hunting them. "I'm with you," Yara whispered, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Let's finish this." Lucas gave her a nod, then led the way through the twisting alleys toward the outskirts of the city, where his ship awaited them. The streets grew quieter, the chaos of Novaria's bustling markets fading into the distance. It was eerily calm, as if the storm in the sky was waiting for the final clash. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. The abbess. Her dark cloak billowed around her, and though the relic's power no longer surged in her hands, she still radiated menace. Her eyes, once cold and calculating, now burned with rage. "You think you've won?" the abbess snarled, her voice filled with venom. "You think destroying the relic was enough to stop me? You're nothing, human. And you," she sneered at Yara, "you are a traitor to everything the sacred moons stand for. You were born for this purpose, and you threw it away." Lucas stepped forward, placing himself between the abbess and Yara. "She's not your pawn anymore. It's over." The abbess laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the empty street. "You're a fool, mercenary. You may have destroyed the relic, but its power still lingers. You'll never escape me." Without warning, the abbess raised her hand, and a surge of dark energy crackled through the air, the last vestiges of the relic's influence coalescing around her. She hurled it toward Lucas and Yara, her face twisted with fury. Lucas shoved Yara out of the way just in time, narrowly dodging the blast. He rolled to his feet, drawing his blaster and firing a shot directly at the abbess. But she was fast, too fast. The bolt of plasma sizzled past her, missing by inches. Yara, her heart racing, scrambled to her feet. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The abbess was too powerful, even without the relic. They needed to outthink her, not outfight her. "Lucas," she called, her voice rising above the storm. "Distract her." Lucas understood immediately. He darted to the side, firing another shot, keeping the abbess's focus on him. She deflected the blast with a wave of her hand, her attention locked on the mercenary. Meanwhile, Yara closed her eyes, her mind racing. She had been raised in the monastery, taught to revere the sacred moons and their ancient power. But now she understood something the abbess had never realized. The power of the moons wasn't meant to control, to dominate. It was meant to protect, to heal. She reached deep within herself, calling on that inner strength, the bond she had always felt with the sacred moons, but had never fully understood. The air around her seemed to shift, growing lighter, as if responding to her will. The abbess noticed the change too late. Yara raised her hand, not in violence, but in peace. A brilliant light flared from her palm, warm and pure, washing over the street. It swept toward the abbess, surrounding her in a radiant glow. The dark energy crackling around her faltered, then dissipated, unable to withstand the force of Yara's will. "No!" the abbess screamed, her voice filled with desperation. She struggled against the light, but it was too late. The power she had so ruthlessly sought to control now turned against her. The light intensified, swallowing her whole. And then, with a final, anguished cry, the abbess was gone. The street fell silent. the storm above them beginning to break, revealing the first hints of dawn on the horizon. Yara stood still, her hand trembling as the last remnants of the light faded. She could hardly believe it was over. The abbess, her tormentor, the one who had tried to control her entire life, was gone. Lucas approached her, his expression filled with quiet admiration. "You did it," he said softly. Yara looked up at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "I didn't know I could." Lucas smiled, his usual roguish grin tempered by something deeper, something real. "I did." For a moment, they stood there, the weight of everything that had happened settling over them. But it was a different kind of weight now, one filled with hope, not fear. "What happens now?" Yara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas shrugged, glancing toward the sky where the storm clouds were slowly dispersing. "We get on my ship, we leave Noveria behind, and we figure out what's next. Together?" Yara smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. She wasn't a pawn in someone else's game. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing beside someone who believed in her, who had fought for her. And she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. As they walked toward the distant lights of the spaceport, hand in hand, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the city. It felt like the beginning of something new, something bright. For both of them, this was the start of a new chapter, a chapter where the power of the sacred moons would no longer be a tool of corruption, but a force of light and hope. And as long as they were together, they knew they could face whatever came next.